Welcome back to Gunik. Today I will show you a 2013 Spanish science fiction spine chiller film named The Last Days. Spoilers ahead, look out and fare thee well. In the year 2013, a strange scourge spreads across the planet, making individuals foster a silly feeling of dread toward heading outside. Assuming they do, they pass on in practically no time. Before long, the roads of each and every city and town all over the planet become a no man's land, with not a solitary individual outside. Mark Delgado has been living in his work environment for a very long time, getting through on the food from the cafeteria and assisting his collaborators with digging away in the parking garage that could take them to the metro. At some point, he sees somebody broke the window of a vehicle to take a GPS, which drives him very crazy and incites him into digging all the more forcefully. This ends up being something positive, since thanks to him, they at long last break the wall and find a protected way out of the structure. Presently everybody is preparing to leave and keeping in mind that sitting tight in line for certain arrangements, Mark can't resist the urge to see one of his managers. Enrique has the GPS in his pack. Mark chooses to follow him and defy him about it, and Enrique acknowledges to talk in private, as long as Mark doesn't tell any other person about it. Mark begins recalling how he met Enrique. Quite a while back, the man was recruited to deal with the organization's efficiency issues and was known for being savage when it came to treating representatives, terminating them decisively if fundamental. At the point when he called Mark to his office, he chastened him for taking such a long time with the task, declining to hear how troublesome the most common way of writing computer programs is, and gave him a final proposal. He must be finished before the month's over or he'd lose his employment. Mark remained until late at the workplace, chipping away at his code and getting more baffled constantly every time it falls flat. His sweetheart Julia called him to let him know she and her companion Andrea were shutting everything down shop, and Mark guaranteed her he'd show up for supper. In any case, his PC blue-screened, and he wound up remaining longer than arranged. At the point when he at last came to his loft, he saw that his neighbor opened his entryway just to see him show up and his better half previously eaten without him. He establishes her making toys for her shop and keeping in mind that taking a gander at a mannequin she considered saving for the future, she raised the subject of having a child, to which Mark answered he didn't think it was the right second. Soon thereafter, he was unable to rest, so he observed some television. The news was discussing a Canadian youngster that recorded his self-destruction subsequent to burning through a half-year inside his home, never leaving in view of dread. The following morning at work everyone was watching a similar clasp, causing Mark's colleague Rivera to leave the region anxiously. One more colleague brought up he hadn't put on something else or washed up in days. Back in the present, Mark advises Enrique that he needs to track down his sweetheart, and the best way to appropriately explore the tram boroughs is with the GPS, since telephones don't have a sign any longer. He offers Enrique an arrangement. In the event that he takes Mark to his sweetheart, he'll give him every one of the provisions he took from Rivera's storage. Enrique at first says no. Yet he alters his perspective before long when Mark takes steps to educate everybody regarding the taken GPS. In the wake of expressing farewell to their collaborators, the two men enter the tram boroughs. The GPS is turned out great, yet they keep it off to save the battery duration, and for the present, they manage with a tram map. There are heaps of individuals down there as of now, and they even hear discharges, so they pick up the pace until they come to the station, which is brimming with survivors from one wall to another. Unexpectedly, a young person takes Enrique's sack with the GPS. He and Mark begin pursuing him through the station, following him higher up and in any event, evading a fire until they come to a region behind the entryway. The youngster joins three men that incorporate his sibling, who is a previous cop and conveys a weapon. As the city outside at last begins losing all its power, the cop makes them tumble to their knees, while his sibling finds the GPS in the rucksack. Then, at that point, he draws nearer to get Mark's pack also. At the point when the lights go off inside the station as well, Enrique bounces on the cop and battles with him for the firearm, while Mark handles the kit and recuperates the GPS after it falls on the floor and gets its screen broken. With the pack protected in his arms, Mark takes cover behind a segment, while Enrique figures out how to get the firearm from the cop and kills him prior to injuring his joint forces with a shot too. Then, at that point, he combines Mark and they take off, effectively blending themselves in the group, thanks to the haziness that has now assumed control over the spot. They come by the steps to wrap the cut Enrique has on his hand, and to check assuming that the GPS is as yet working after it fell. Fortunately it does. At the point when Mark sees Enrique is keeping the firearm, he believes he's going to be abandoned, Yet Enrique says he will hold true to his word. Mark begins reconsidering the days prior to the lockdown. One morning, when he was passing on his loft to go to work, he heard a major measure of flies inside his neighbor's place and seen the entryway was open. So he went inside to see what was happening. He found the whole condo loaded up with garbage sacks and a rotten smell that made him hack. His neighbor found him and went after him with a blade, asking why he came inside when he had never looked into him and didn't actually know his name. Mark asked him for how long he had remained inside, and the man said he hadn't left the condo in months. He attempted to, yet he was excessively terrified and couldn't do it. A while later, Mark went to work, where he saw Rivera being hauled away by safety officers after he got terminated for having been resting in the workplace and never returning home. Mark followed them out as Rivera made an honest effort to retaliate without any result. The watchman hauled him outside, and he promptly began writhing. Having a hypothesis of what was happening, Mark advised the gatekeepers to assist him with taking him back inside. However, it was past the point of no return. Rivera was at that point dead. A while later, Mark checked Rivera's storage and found a lot of endurance supplies, similar to a spotlight, a gas canister, and canned food. Later at night, he informed Julia regarding what occurred and how he thought something serious was going on. Julia helped him and they had intercourse. Back in the present, Mark awakens from a rest and doesn't see Enrique anyplace, so he believes he's unwanted him. Yet Enrique before long appears with a plastic pack he's recovered to safeguard the GPS from water harm. The two men return to the metro boroughs, where Mark attempts to figure out the thing, or who is sitting tight for Enrique at his objective. However, he will not reply. He additionally sees how Enrique saves the seeds of all that he eats, similar to apples. A few minutes after the fact, with the assistance of the GPS, they found an entry to the sewers and bounce inside, not getting injured on the grounds that the water pads their fall. They utilize the GPS again to track down their strategy for getting around, and in the end, they showed up at the region under Mark's high-rise. To get inside, they make a basic arrangement. They hang the gas canister from the roof lines, and they'll make detonate by firing it with the weapon. Enrique bombs his shot, so Mark dominates and attempts himself, likewise bombing his most memorable attempt, and making his ear drain with the commotion. At the point when he attempts once more, be that as it may, he raises a ruckus around town, and the subsequent blast tosses him back on the floor. Enrique assists him with standing up, and together they climb the trash and go through the opening to get to the structure, which very much like the station is additionally loaded up with displaced people. His old neighbor is as yet living in a similar loft. However, the way to Mark's has its lock broken. They can see an eye taking a gander at them through the spy hole, and this rankles Mark, who starts shouting and pushing the entryway that is being kept down by a man communicating in an unknown dialect. Exploiting the man's uncovered hand, Mark chomps it, making him step back, lastly getting to enter his home. The man compromises them with a blade, and Enrique takes out his firearm consequently, arriving at a stalemate until the man's significant other and girl appear. The young lady figures out their language and makes sense of they didn't have any place to go, so they took the condo since it was vacant. After the two men put their weapons down, Mark lets them know the spot is his and snaps a picture of Julia from the wall to inquire as to whether they've seen her. Yet they swear there was no one there when they showed up. A while later, they investigated the spot. Enrique tracks down no food in the cooler, yet dead birds are being ready to eat, and an old popcorn pack in the garbage bin from which he recovers the seeds. He likewise takes a kitchen blade. Mark, in the interim, goes to Julia's work table, and subsequent to finding her mannequin, he snatches a drawing the young lady made and pivots the piece of paper when he sees the name of a specialist on the corner. It's the image of an ultrasound in light of the fact that Julia has been pregnant since the last time he saw her, and he had close to zero familiarity with it. Mark begins recalling their last time together. They were watching the report about the pandemic they were calling the frenzy, which was causing an ever-increasing number of passings all over the planet. The public authority requested that the residents remain cool-headed and to continue to carry on their day-to-day existences, not surprisingly, which rankled Mark. His state of mind deteriorated when the news changed to show pregnant ladies conceiving an offspring in dreadful circumstances, and he began to yell about the untrustworthiness, all things considered, which made Julia at long last comprehend that he never genuinely needed children, and all his given reasons during that time were simply pardons. Resentful and crying, she ran and secured herself in the washroom, overlooking him when Mark attempted to converse with her through the entryway. He left for work then. At that point, previously seeing how there weren't many individuals in the city and the rubbish was stacking up in the jars, A man in the tram was in any event wearing a veil. At the point when he came to the workplace, he called Julia. However, it was Andrea who got in her phone telling him Julia would have rather not conversed with him right now. Getting desperate, Mark chosen to return, particularly after both the telephone and close-by TVs lost their association. In any case, when he ventured outside, he began to feel sick, so he needed to run back inside and remain there for all time. Back in the present, it has begun to rain, so Mark and Enrique assist the family with get-together water by utilizing an old cot. Before long, individuals all around the city are utilizing sticks to put containers and pots under the downpour to top off their water save. At night, Enrique cuts 2 lances out of broomsticks, and Mark fills different jugs with the recently gained water. He likewise places Julia's mannequin in his pack. They get once more into the sewers in the first part of the day, and when they arrive at a split, they quarrel about what method for picking. Mark needs to go to the shopping center where Julia used to attempt to check whether she's there. However, Enrique rejects, saying his arrangement was exclusively to take him to his loft, and it isn't his shortcoming she wasn't there when they showed up. He even takes out his blade to shield himself and contemplates whether Julia is even alive, which makes Mark incensed and makes him bounce on him to thump him. In the battle, Enrique drops the blade and Mark drops the electric lamp. What breaks when it raises a ruckus around town. The 2 men separate the battle and Mark requests to understand what Enrique has that could be a higher priority than his significant other and child. So Enrique at long last admits he needs to go to the medical clinic his dad has been remaining at after he lost the ability to move in view of an embolism. He additionally lets Mark know that he could accompany him on the grounds that once he arrives at the emergency clinic, the GPS can be his. After some dithering, Mark acknowledges. The pair discovers a few steps that take them inside a congregation. While glancing around, they find a light or a hip cup with liquor still in it, so they utilize the 2 things in addition to a wood to light a fire. It appears to be the light is called somebody's consideration, since they hear a few clamors close by. So they get their lances and go explore. What they find at the rear of the congregation is all in all a shock. It's a bear who rapidly begins pursuing them. Mark is going to arrive at the sewer steps when he sees Enrique has fallen and the bear is on him, so he chooses to remain and help. He jabs the creature with his lance to get him off Enrique, who surges back to their huge fire and lights a light to keep the bear under control. This isn't sufficient. In any case, the bear is progressing and pushing them towards the entryways that would take them outside. So Mark concocts the arrangement. He requests that Enrique drop the light, and when he does, the bear utilizes the opportunity to bounce on him, so Mark gets him with his lance pointed at him, making the bear pierce itself on it. The 2 men can't resist the urge to chuckle when they find a label that says the bear comes from the Barcelona Zoo. Minutes after the fact, they're eating the bear meat that they have simmered over the fire. Enrique says thanks to Mark for remaining as opposed to getting away with the GPS, and concedes that prior to everything occurred, he would have terminated him, regardless of whether he had completed the venture on time. In any case, this admission just makes them snicker once more. Enrique additionally concedes that he's stressed that without his dad, no one will see, assuming he passes on, and there are a few significant things he actually needs to converse with him about. Consequently, Mark lets him know he told Julia he didn't need kids, yet it wasn't completely obvious. He was simply frightened he wouldn't have the option to deal with and safeguard the youngster, a trepidation that has just deteriorated in the ongoing circumstance. A few hours after the fact, they return to the sewers and go over a family coming from the other way. One of them is harmed, so they advise them to go with them to the medical clinic. However, they answer with awful news. Bits of hearsay said the medical clinic Enrique's dad was at is burned to the ground. Going ballistic, Enrique hurries into the closest entryway and enters a structure, where he climbs the steps until he arrives at a story sufficiently high to supervise the city and affirm the reports. The clinic has without a doubt burned to the ground. Feeling like he has nothing else to live for, Enrique breaks the window with a seat and prepares to bounce. However, Mark pushes him back inside and lets him know he really wants him. Enrique dissents, so he gifts Mark the seeds for his future child and advises him to leave. In the wake of going through the sewers once more, Mark at long last arrives at the shopping center, which he enters through a parking area loaded up with bodies. Overlooking the vibe of being followed, he races to Julia's shop, yet he just tracks down the body of Andrea's mom, getting amazingly frantic. He glances through every one of the papers and notepads, however he tracks down no hints. so he tosses everything on the ground with outrage and cries until he sees something in the mirror. Subsequent to cleaning away the residue, he finds a note from Andrea for her mom, saying they're trapped in the general store segment of the shopping center. Mark hustles to that area, which has been blockaded so individuals leaving higher up can't come to take food from them any longer. The men monitoring them undermine Mark with a bow, so he takes out an image he brought from his loft and makes sense of he doesn't need inconvenience. He simply needs to track down his sweetheart. One of the men goes to the back to check whether Julia is there with them, and keeping in mind that pausing, Mark sees a few shadows moving behind him. Unexpectedly, a gathering that had been following him emerges, exploiting the interruption Mark has made to break into the market and battle for the food. As the two gatherings get into a brutal showdown, Mark enters the market too and searches for Julia, yet tracks down Andrea. All things being equal, she specifies the last day she saw Julia was before she went to the specialist and, subsequent to starting off an approaching assailant, guides Mark towards a close-by exit. Nonetheless, they get isolated when a pillar ablaze tumbles from the roof between them, catching Andrea between the flares and the rest of the world. She opens the entryways, and Mark urges her to go out. However, she can't force herself to make it happen and kicks the bucket when a greater amount of the roof falls on top of her. Mark burns through no time and starts running the other way, just to be bounced on by one of the insane looters. He's going to be cut when unexpectedly, Enrique shows up and drives the person away prior to assisting Mark with standing up, as he lets him know he realized he'd in any case require him. The assailant hasn't left, however, and he rapidly draws nearer again to wound Enrique in the stomach. Enrique drives him away once more and is going to skewer him with his lance when he sees it's simply a youngster, so he chooses to save him. Imagining his injury is certainly not no joking matter, and he's fine, Enrique tells Mark they ought to hustle out of the shopping center before the entire structure breakdowns. Yet again they cross the sewers until they find an opening in the roof that another person dug, and when they move inside it, they wind up in a cinema. There's no one around, so Mark moves toward the glass entryway and sees that Julia's primary care physician's office is across the road. It's beyond the realm of possibilities for him to arrive at it like this, however, on the grounds that the passage is obstructed.